In 2022, military spending in Europe saw its steepest year-on-year increase in at least 3 decades. This single fact reveals a continent shaken from its slumber. At the heart of this new reality is a question about an old alliance. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is a group of countries bound by a promise to defend each other if one is attacked. For over 70 years, this collective security pact has been the bedrock of European peace and stability, a shield against external aggression. It was forged in the aftermath of a devastating world war. The core idea was simple but powerful. An attack on one is an attack on all. Today, as the date is November 27, 2025, that foundational promise is being tested like never before. The security landscape of Europe has been fundamentally altered. A major land war has returned to the continent, something many believed was a relic of the past. This has forced nations to reevaluate their defense postures, their military spending, and their faith in collective security arrangements. The central question now echoes in halls of power, from Washington to Warsaw: is NATO losing its power? Is the shield that has protected Europe for generations beginning to crack under pressure? To answer this, we must look beyond the headlines and political rhetoric. The debate is not a simple yes or no. On one side, critics point to internal political divisions, a sluggish response to emerging threats, and failures to meet financial commitments. They see an alliance slow to adapt and fractured by competing national interests. On the other side, supporters point to the alliance's recent expansion, increased defense spending across the board, and a renewed sense of purpose uniting members. Both perspectives hold a piece of the truth. One of the most significant challenges facing NATO comes not from external adversaries, but from within. The political landscapes of its member countries are often turbulent and unpredictable, creating deep fissures in the alliance's unity. In some nations, populist leaders have openly questioned the value of collective defense, prioritizing nationalist agendas over international cooperation. They frame NATO commitments as a burden on their taxpayers rather than an investment in their security. This rhetoric can erode public support and make it difficult to justify increased military spending or troop deployments to support an ally, undermining the very foundation of solidarity. These internal political debates create a climate of uncertainty. When one major member state hints that its commitment is conditional, it sends a ripple of anxiety through the entire alliance, especially on the eastern flank. Strategic planning becomes a nightmare when commitments can be upended by a single election cycle. An adversary watching might perceive weakness and disunity, potentially emboldening them to test NATO's resolve. The alliance's strength has always been its political cohesion. When that cohesion frays, its credibility as a deterrent is diminished, making conflict more, not less, likely. Disagreements over how to engage with potential adversaries highlight these cracks. Some states, often due to economic ties or geographical distance from the threat, may advocate for dialogue and for de-escalation. Others, feeling more immediate danger, push for a hardline stance, calling for robust sanctions or a massive military buildup. This divergence makes it difficult for NATO to speak with one voice or act quickly. What one country calls prudent deterrence, another might view as dangerous provocation, leading to paralysis when swift, unified action is needed. A short, human story illustrates this point. A Lithuanian army officer, coordinating defense plans with allied units, spoke of shifting priorities. "One year our partners are here training for every scenario," he said. The next, a new government comes in, and the defense budget is cut. Joint exercises are scaled back. The nature of warfare has changed more in the last decade than in the 50 years prior, and NATO is struggling to keep pace. The traditional threats of tank columns and infantry divisions have not disappeared, but they have been supplemented by a host of new, asymmetric dangers. Cyber attacks are now a front line of conflict. Hostile actors can target a nation's critical infrastructure, power grids, financial systems, communication networks without ever firing a shot. A successful cyber attack could cripple a country's ability to function and mobilize its military, causing chaos and panic on a massive scale, all launched from a keyboard thousands of miles away. This new domain of warfare requires a completely different set of skills. Tool strategies. While NATO has officially recognized cyberspace as an operational domain, building a credible defense is a slow and expensive process. It requires recruiting and training elite cybersecurity experts, developing sophisticated defensive software, establishing clear protocols for responding to a major digital attack. A significant challenge is that the capabilities among member states are wildly uneven, creating weak links in the alliance's collective digital shield that adversaries can exploit. Beyond the digital realm, the physical battlefield has also been transformed. The proliferation of cheap, highly effective, unmanned aerial vehicles, or drones, has democratized air power. Small, agile units can now inflict devastating damage on heavily armored vehicles' entrenched positions as seen in recent conflicts. This shift challenges the long-held military doctrines of many NATO countries, which are still centered around expensive, heavy platforms like main battle tanks, fighter jets. Adapting requires not just new equipment, but a fundamental rethinking of tactics, training, force structure, a process that can take years to implement across a 30-plus member alliance. Furthermore, the threat of hybrid warfare looms large. This strategy blends conventional military pressure, covert operations, disinformation campaigns, economic coercion. An adversary could foment civil unrest, spread false narratives to erode trust in the government, and create a crisis on the border, all while maintaining a veneer of plausible deniability. For NATO, responding to such ambiguous aggression is incredibly difficult. It blurs the line for triggering Article 5, as it is often hard to attribute the actions to a state actor or to classify them as an armed attack in the traditional sense. The full-scale invasion of a sovereign European nation a few years ago served as a brutal wake-up call for the continent. It acted as a stress test for NATO, forcing it to move from a theoretical posture of deterrence to a very real and active defense. In response, the alliance demonstrated that it could, indeed, act. It swiftly activated its response force for the first time in a collective defense role, and it massively reinforced its eastern flank. Thousands of additional troops from member states like the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, were deployed to countries like Poland, Romania, the Baltic states, sending a clear signal that NATO territory was off-limits. This rapid reinforcement was a visible and powerful demonstration of Allied solidarity. Convoys of military hardware rolled across European highways. Transport planes filled the skies, moving soldiers and equipment into position. For the citizens of the frontline states, the sight of Allied flags flying alongside their own was a profound reassurance. It showed that the promise of Article 5 was not just words on a piece of paper, but a tangible commitment backed by military might. The alliance also coordinated a massive flow of military aid, intelligence, training, helping it to mount a surprisingly effective defense against a much larger aggressor. However, the response also revealed significant limitations and internal friction. While the alliance acted, some critics argued that it acted too slowly and too cautiously in the initial stages of the crisis. The decision-making process, which requires consensus among all members, can be cumbersome when time is of the essence. Debates over what types of weaponry to provide and how quickly to provide them exposed different risk appetites among the allies. Some members, fearing escalation, were hesitant to supply advanced offensive systems. At the heart of many of NATO's internal debates is a simple number: 2%. In 2014, following Russia's initial aggression against Ukraine, NATO members pledged to move toward spending at least 2% of their gross domestic product on defense by 2024. This target was intended to ensure that the burden of collective security was shared more equitably and that the alliance as a whole had the resources needed to meet emerging threats. For years, however, compliance with this guideline was poor. Many members, particularly some of the larger European economies, consistently fell short of the goal, relying heavily on the military might of the United States. This disparity in spending has been a persistent source of tension. The United States, which has historically accounted for the lion's share of the alliance's total defense expenditure, has repeatedly called on its European allies to step up and pay their fair share. The argument is one of simple fairness. American taxpayers should not have to shoulder a disproportionate burden for a security umbrella that benefits all members. For those countries that do meet or exceed the 2% target, often those on the eastern flank who feel the threat most acutely, the reluctance of wealthier allies to spend more can feel like a betrayal of the spirit of the alliance. The recent escalation of conflict in Europe has dramatically changed the conversation. The stark reality of war has prompted a wave of announcements from governments across the continent, with many now pledging to meet or even surpass the 2% target. Germany, for instance, announced a historic reversal of its long-standing defense policy, creating a special €100 billion fund to modernize its military. Simple data shows this shift. In 2014, only 3 members met the 2% goal. By 2025, that number has surged, with over 2/3 of the allies expected to reach the benchmark. This infusion of cash is critical for filling long-neglected gaps in military capability. However, spending money is not the same as spending it wisely. Ramping up defense budgets quickly presents its own challenges. It takes time to train soldiers, build complex weapon systems, and develop the industrial capacity to produce ammunition and equipment at scale. A sudden flood of cash can lead to inefficient procurement and waste if not managed carefully. The key question for NATO is whether this new financial commitment will be sustained over the long term, even if the immediate sense of crisis fades, and whether the money will be invested strategically to build the capabilities the alliance actually needs for the future. Despite its internal challenges, it would be a grave mistake to underestimate NATO's enduring power. The alliance's greatest strength has always been the interoperability of its forces. They use standardized procedures, equipment, and communication systems. This means that in a crisis, a multinational force can be assembled and fight together as a single, cohesive unit. An American jet can be refueled by an Italian tanker and provide air cover for a column of Polish tanks, all guided by intelligence from a British drone. This level of integration is unmatched by any other alliance in the world. Furthermore, the recent security crisis has paradoxically strengthened NATO's appeal and expanded its ranks. The very aggression that was intended to weaken the West and push NATO back has had the opposite effect. Finland, Sweden, saw the invasion of a neighbor and concluded that their best hope for security lay within the alliance. Their decisions to join NATO were historic, adding 2 highly capable militaries and strategically critical territory to the coalition. This expansion sends a powerful message that, in an era of renewed great power competition, the security guarantee offered by Article 5 remains highly attractive. NATO is also getting smarter about building partnerships beyond its formal membership. The alliance has also deepened its ties with partners across the globe: Australia, Japan, South Korea, recognizing that security challenges in Europe are often linked to global dynamics. These partnerships create a broader network of like-minded democracies committed to upholding a rules-based international order, amplifying NATO's influence and reach. So, is NATO losing its power? The evidence suggests not, but its power is being profoundly tested and forced to transform. The alliance is at a genuine crossroads, caught between the inertia of its past and the urgent demands of a dangerous new future. It faces real and serious challenges: political divisions that threaten its unity, a rapidly evolving threat landscape that outpaces its doctrines, persistent squabbles over burden sharing. These are not trivial issues. Left unaddressed, they could corrode the alliance's foundation and weaken its deterrent power over time. Yet forces pushing NATO toward greater strength are equally powerful. The return of major war to Europe has starkly reminded the alliance of its core purpose: galvanizing political will and public support. Defense budgets are rising. New members are joining. The alliance is adapting strategies to counter new threats like cyber-hybrid warfare. NATO is not monolithic. It's a living alliance of democracies that adapts in crisis. These struggles are growing pains of adaptation. To navigate forward, NATO leaders must act decisively. First, reinforce unity as highest priority. Constant dialogue, Commitment to consensus building, putting collective security above narrow national interests. Second, sustain defense spending and invest wisely in 21st century capabilities, cyber defense drones, robust logistics. Third, streamline decision-making to be more agile in crisis. Ultimately, NATO's future rests on unwavering mutual defense. Europe's new security reality is perilous, yet offers an opportunity to emerge stronger and more unified. The choice is clear. Nations must stand together, invest in shared defense, and uphold the promise made over 75 years ago. If they do, NATO will remain the most successful alliance and guarantor of peace in Europe. The road ahead is difficult, but mutual defense, if kept alive, remains a powerful beacon.